Hey, welcome to another edition of Dream Talks. Thank you for joining us. We are super excited to have our guest on today. Her name is Janessa Grace. She's lived an amazing and incredible life, a supernatural life, and one where the faithfulness of God has been proven to her over and over again. God speaks to her clearly in dreams, and we're going to talk on this episode about mates, dates, and babies. This is going to be really good. It's going to be super fun, and I'm super excited to have her with us. Hi, Janessa.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Yeah. This is, boy, when we started talking about dreams, I was just so amazed at the different dreams that you've had in your life, the different things that have come true, the way that God has spoken to you. And of course, you know, it's my life is dreams. And I have a lot of conversations about dreams. But when I heard like the detail and the specificity of some of your stories, it just rocked me. And I was like, man, Janessa and I need to do a show. We just need to have a conversation about dreams. So here we are.
Yeah. And it's an honor to be here because I know that like this is your lane. This is the anointing that you walk in. And so you've interviewed incredible people, you know, CEOs, people in the political realm, government. And so when you asked me to speak, I was really honored and really humbled to be here. So thank you. Thank you for letting me share my story and just the testimony of God's faithfulness through dreams.
Thank you for your willingness to. We're gonna hit some sensitive topics today. We're gonna talk about. I mean, it's gonna be real. We're gonna talk about dates and mates and babies and marriage and things that didn't work out the way that we thought they should, and heartbreak and restoration. And boy, I'm just super excited. Where should we start? What do you want to begin with?
So I thought I'd share a little bit about my testimony and just, where the Lord's taken me. So I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were first generation Christians. They were saved out of the Jesus movement in the 70s. And so on fire, filled with the Spirit, just loved Jesus wholeheartedly. But when I was 4 years old, my dad had a motorcycle accident and it paralyzed him from the waist down. So he was in a wheelchair up until I was 20 when he ultimately passed away just from complications. A lot of times paraplegics don't live, you know, really long lives just because there's a lot of difficulty with being in a wheelchair. But through those years, I watched my parents, you know, just fight to save their marriage over and over in the midst of really traumatic and really difficult circumstances. But my mom, she dug her heels in. She stayed, you know, faithful to my dad. And he ended up being one of the most incredible, mighty men of God I've ever known. I have these memories of coming home from school and he would just be in the living room, just worshiping the Lord. Like his circumstance really humbled him and brought such a tenderness to his spirit. So I had that as an example of what marriage looks like, you know, how hard it is, but you stick in it, but it just makes you holy. It doesn't make you happy. It makes you holy. So shortly after my dad passed away, I got into the missions field. I traveled all over the world for the next few years and I loved it. Like I come alive overseas. That is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I tried to weave in my life throughout the past few years. And so, my heart burns for the mission field. When I came back from the mission field, I ended up marrying my dad's best friend when I was 25, which at that time it felt like a God thing. You know, he knew my dad from when he was younger. You know, his dad and my dad were best friends. He was straight out of Bible college and he was going to be a pastor. So it just really felt like this God ordained marriage. But 6 years into that marriage, my ex-husband started questioning his faith and questioning if he wanted to continue to be married. So in 2015, we separated and I sought the Lord on what to do. You know, I'm like, God, this isn't what I thought it would be. Like, it looked like you were in this at the beginning, but what do I do with it now? And I heard the Lord say so clearly to stand. He brought me to Ephesians 6:13, where it says, when the day of evil comes, when you've done everything that you can do, stand your ground and continue to stand. So I was like, okay, I'm going to fight for this marriage. I'm going to pray. I'm just going to press in until the Lord says otherwise. So for the next 3 years, we continued to communicate. We continued to see each other off and on. But the Lord was just saying, like, stand, stand, stand. And it was such a difficult journey. I would petition the Lord almost daily, like, Lord, can I be released from this? Like, this isn't what I thought marriage was supposed to look like. I've seen, hard things in marriage before, but never, being separated for 3 years. But the Lord just kept saying, stand. And so that was hard, being in limbo in any situation.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, you can't move forward, you can't move backwards, and you're just waiting for something to happen.
That's the worst.
It's so hard. It's so difficult. And the Lord would continue to confirm it through prophets, through strangers. They'd come up to me and be like, I just feel like the Lord's saying to stand. I'm like, oh, I would agree. But the Lord was doing something so beautiful in my heart. Like, he was really just digging up those rocks in the soil of my heart. He was softening me. He was tenderizing me. And he was becoming my husband in those times where it's like everything was stripped away. During those 3 years, I actually lost my brother as well. So I kind of came to this place where I was like, man, I don't have a dad. I don't have a brother. I don't have a husband. Like, Lord, you need to be my father. You need to be my brother. You need to be my husband. And he was so faithful. He showed himself mighty in so many different ways, so faithful in so many different ways through those 3 years. So it was definitely a journey. And after 3 years of standing, the Lord gave me a dream or I guess a vision more so at this time, of a bird pushing a baby bird out of the nest. And I felt like the Lord was saying, like, now's the time to get your husband to move on a decision, push him out of the nest, like get him to move. And so I, reach out to him. I say, hey, can we talk? We speak later that afternoon. And I say, hey, I can't keep opening up my heart to you and then only getting, bits and pieces or bread.
No joke. That's heart-wrenching.
Heart-wrenching.
Mm.
So anyway, so I said, if you either need to come home or we're cutting off communication. Like,
wow.
This is where we're at. Like, I just can't keep going back and forth on this. It's kind of like time to get off the pot, time to go or get off the pot. That's
bold. That's an ultimatum, though. I mean, that's a really bold move, especially if you still wanted to be married. People usually do that when they expect the person to leave, but to want to stay married and to just speak truth to that tough situation and say, dude, man, you're not helping my heart any. Like, what are you going to do here?
Yeah.
That takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. Thank you. It was solely the Lord, just his strength to lead me and guide me every step of the way. Because even then I still didn't feel fully released to divorce him, but it was just that, like, we just need some movement. So he said he wasn't ready. And he hung up the phone, and then it goes silent for 10 months. Just no communication whatsoever. Well, April 2019 rolls around. We got to do our taxes. Like, this, life is still happening. We're still married, even though we're separated. So I reach out to him. I'm like, hey, we got to do our taxes. So we meet at, the tax place, get our taxes done. And afterwards, he's like, hey, can we talk? I'm like, all right. So we talked a little bit. He's like, I want to start communicating again. Like, I want to start, having some type of relationship, like making an effort again. Like, okay, maybe this is God moving, maybe this is God's intervention here. Like, it's been silent for so long, but I feel like maybe his heart is softened. So I said, all right. A few days later, I'm hopeful at this point, right? Like, a few days later, on April 18th, that was our 10-year wedding anniversary. I didn't hear anything from him, not a peep. Like, okay. I go to bed that night and I have a dream. And this dream was, one of the most shocking dreams I probably could say I've ever had. And in this dream, my husband was sleeping with multiple people. He had actually been sleeping with 8 men and women. Men and women. Yeah, 8 men and women in the dream. I wake up like in a panic. I'm like, shoot out of bed. I look at the clock. It's 3:30 in the morning. And I'm like, can't be true. I'd asked him multiple times before, in the past 3-4 years, like, are you seeing anybody? No, I'm not seeing anybody. I'm like, wow, this can't be true.
That's pretty graphic, isn't he?
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, to have a dream, like, that's like salacious. I mean, that's like soap opera kind of stuff. Like, yes. What?
It kind of leaves you with sometimes a little bit of a slimy feeling, like, ew.
Yeah, like what? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I never thought he would open those doors, but the person I knew would not have done that. So I pray all day. I'm like, Lord, is this from you? Like, this is it? I didn't feel like it was coming from me, but I'm like, is this from you? Is this something I should address with him? So, So I just I'm just sick to my stomach. So I text him and I was like, hey, well, if you have time today, like, can we talk? And he's like, yeah, no problem. So he gives me a call and I tell him, I'm like, I had a dream last night and I need you to be completely honest with me. I said, are you seeing someone? He says, yes. And then I asked him if it was a guy. I was like, is it a guy? What? No, it's not a guy. I'm like, I don't know. You know, this dream was a guy.
You went there. I can't believe you went there. That is so hilarious.
I promise I'm not trying to emasculate you. I just want to know. Like, so
how long have you been sleeping with men? Like,
right. So anyways, he says no. And I said, like, are you living with her? You know, are you living with this other woman? And he said yes. And he admitted that he'd been living with her for about a year. And so I was just shocked. It was just like the rug had been pulled out from under me. You know, I'd just been like hit with the sign from the Lord, like boom, like.
Right.
But with the kindness of the Lord to rescue me, when I was about to walk back into letting him back into my life, opening up communication again, and God was like, nope. And the being on like the 10-year wedding anniversary, I mean, that just felt really serendipitous. It was just like, God's like, this is boom, you're done. Timers went off. God's like, and you're free. So it was a lot of emotions of, oh my gosh, I'm free. I don't have to be tied to this marriage anymore. But like, ouch, I really thought it was going to turn out a different way. You know, it seemed like the Lord's hand was in it in the beginning. And for it to take the turn it did, it was really painful, but really freeing, just the dichotomy of the two.
Wow, that is crazy. So, of course, God gave you the freedom then at that point to exit and not to continue to contend when this guy's living with another woman.
Right. And just like I had been obedient, you know, I did everything that the Lord had asked me to do. Like I followed him every way I knew how, you know, even in my limited hearing sometimes, like he was faithful to lead and I was just going to be obedient. So I'm so grateful again for what he did in my heart during those 4 years of just the tenderizing. I'm not the same person I was in the beginning. You know, I went into the marriage 25 years old, you know, rose-colored glasses an inch thick, and who I am now is just like, man, the solidification of my walk with the Lord is, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I don't want to go through that ever again, right. But the intimacy and the nearness of the Lord, I'm like, man, that was worth it. That was 100% worth it.
It's so good that you can say that, because so many people, you know, they can't. I mean, having been through a similar situation, you know, if you have to get divorced, then I certainly don't recommend divorce. I'm one of those that just fights and contends for marriage. But if you're continuing to fight and contend and you're prayerfully considering, you know, whatever the Lord's will is, and you're staying in it and you're seeking to work on your own stuff and you're humble enough to, you know, do whatever you need to do, including get help, you know, with communication or admit that you're wrong or whatever. Like the only way, in my opinion, to exit a marriage is if God himself releases you.
Yes.
And, you know, I don't think people stick around. They go through trauma, they get hurt, they get their heart broke, they get upset. And then they're like, well, I don't need to be here. And God doesn't want me to be unhappy. But to stay and contend when your heart isn't being cared for by the other person, especially if you're a woman and the man is, you know, not championing you. And when God releases you, you know, that's so powerful, because, you know, like there's such a stigma too on divorce in the church. And you know, as somebody that's been divorced, I hate the fact that I had to go through that I went through that. And it was not my choice, just like it wasn't your choice. You know, you stay and you contend and you fight. And at the end of the day, if you're the only one in it, you're the only one in it. And eventually God will release you and say, you know what, I'm going to protect and guard your heart, and you're not going to stay in this place any longer.
Right.
But, you know, that's really controversial, because so many people, especially who haven't been through what you've been through, would say, well, God would never tell you. People tell me this stuff all the time about you. God would never give you a dream that would make you uncomfortable. I'm like, have you read scripture, people? Because seriously, people were terrified in their dreams. But people would say, there's no way God told you that you should get divorced. And actually, he didn't tell you to get divorced. What he did is he revealed the truth of the situation that you then confronted your ex with and said, this is the dream that I had. And he came clean, when it sounds like he had he had been, untruthful to you the whole time, as well as unfaithful.
Right.
So, and then God was like, okay, well, now you have a clean exit, but, and people don't understand too, the journey of the fight lets you know who you are.
Yeah.
Because, and even though, there's such a stigma again on divorce, it's like people that have never been married, they really don't know how long they'll stay and fight. They think they have good intentions when they get started. But if you've been through a heart-wrenching divorce, first of all, know that God wants to heal you, and he wants to repair your heart, and he wants to champion your cause, and he does want you to have community and relationship in your life. And I believe if it's your desire to be married, that he has somebody to partner with you, but it's not going to be a one-sided thing. It's going to be a marriage that's ordained by the Lord. And if somebody, doesn't stay in that place, like in Ephesians 5, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, God at some point will remove them. But staying in that place to fight and knowing that, man, when it was the hardest it's ever been, I stayed in it anyway. So then, if I have communication issues, if I meet somebody in the future and, this or that happens, we go through bumps in the road or whatever, your ability, because you know who you are, to stay and fight and contend for the promises of God in your life. That's huge.
Yes. Yeah. What do you think the 8 meant? The men and women in the dream, the men and women that he'd been with, there was 8 total.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you would ask that, because a lot of times, of course, 7 being the number of completion, the number of divine completion, the number in a week, 8 then represents new beginnings, and so the idea that that's what this dream was for you. And I think it's interesting that God gave you 8, because it doesn't sound like, and not that it's ours to know how many people he had been with, but even if he wasn't with 8, even if he was just with the 1, and even if there weren't women, there were just men, God gave you such a dream that was so vivid and emotional that you couldn't ignore it. And frankly, again, so salacious, so out of the ordinary, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
This is true. This is nuts. This is crazy town. But it caused you to actually make the phone call, do the hard thing, confront him, and say, you really need to tell me. And it was that moment that you got the truth, and then the deliverance, and God begins to restore your heart. But I think what God was letting you know was the conversation that you're going to have from this incredibly salacious dream is going to be a new beginning for you. And, wanting to be in a place where you're stuck and you feel like I've done everything I can, and it feels like my future and my destiny is in the hands of somebody else that clearly is not following God. That's just a tough place to be. And like I said, he's not going to leave you there long. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That new beginning.
Yeah.
I like it.
And so now you're in a new place, and you're in a place.
I'm in a new place now. Yeah. So once I got that information that the Lord had revealed in the dream, I filed for divorce, sold our house, and I moved to a loft downtown, all within 3 months. It was just, everything happened so quickly. I got to get out of here. I sold everything. I purged. I wanted, everything brand new. And so I moved to this loft downtown, and then COVID hits in 2020. And it was a really hard time, very isolating, very lonely. But again, the Lord continued to do a deep work in my heart. It was a lot of healing. I had healed a lot through the 3 years of standing, but the information I had in 2019 was a new wound. So the Lord was really tending to my heart in 2020. And so my lease was coming to an end in 2020. I'm like, God, what am I going to do? It's like, you know what? I can work anywhere. I'm working remote. The world is shut down. I knew a family that was living in the Dominican Republic that are missionaries out there. I'm like, I'm going to go stay with them. So I, again, sold everything. I literally had 3 boxes I sent to my mom's basement. And I went down to the Dominican Republic, and I stayed with this family, a pastor and his wife. She teaches English down there. And I was in the DR for, 3 months. Amazing time. I would get on to my WebExes and have conference calls through work, and they're like, is that a fake background? Because I see tropical trees and papayas. This is legit. I'm on the beach right now. It was again, another beautiful place to heal and allow the Lord to just tend my heart. So But my mom was like, it's December. I want you home for Christmas. Like, you need to wrap it up, get home. Like, okay. So I fly back home the end of 2020, and I'm moving with my sister and her husband. And I'm like, what am I going to do now? Again, that question of like, my whole life has just been uprooted, overturned. Right. It looks nothing like I thought it was going to. And so I just start to seek the Lord, like, God, what are these next steps? And I felt the Lord put the question back on me, like, what are your heart's desires? What do you want? I was like, I really want a home of my own. I want to put back down roots. I want a foundation. I don't want to be like, I've been so displaced, I don't want to just be like flying in the wind. So I said, I'd really like a home. The Lord's like, well, what kind of a home? So I got really specific. It was just this invitation to dream again. I was like, I want a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, little brick and stone Tudor. I want arched doorways. I want hardwood floors. I want a 1-car garage, like just bam, 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 this list, and started to pray for that. And, a couple days later, I get on Zillow, and the first house that pops up is this little brick Tudor, just 5 minutes down the street from my sister's house where I was living. Oh, wow. And it was listed at $150,000, and it was on the market for almost a month. I'm like, why is this house on the market for a month? Like, the market, things are flying off the shelf. Like, there's got to be something wrong with it. So I get a hold of a realtor. We go see the house the next day, and I walk in, and it needs a complete remodel. I mean, the house was, all the walls were like primary colors, like red and blue and yellow and green. And the family that had lived there before was kind of a short sale foreclosure type of situation. And they had cut the wiring, the plumbing needed to be replaced. The HVAC sounded like, a jet plane taking off when you turned it on, which is awful. It's like, this house needs a ton of work. And so I'm like, is this a project I want to take on? My sister and her husband said, hey, if it is a project you want to take on, you can continue to live with us while you work on it. So I would still have a place to stay. I'm like, it's just me. Like, I can paint, I can clean, but as far as like the bigger jobs, like, I just don't know if I can do this. So I was like, all right, Lord, I ask you for a dream. I'm just going to come to your throne again. I ask you for a dream. Will you speak to me? So that night I get a dream, and in this dream, I'm in this house that I had just looked at. I'm in the living room with my realtor and with my mom, and there's a Christmas tree in the corner of the living room. And we're walking around and we're looking at like all the work that needed to be done. And so and like, I remember specifically thinking like, these hardwood floors need to be refinished. Like, they're in bad shape. So my realtor turns to me in the dream, and he said, you offered 158, but if you would have just offered 160, you would have gotten the house. Then I woke up. And remember, this house was listed at 150. It needs like a full remodel. I was not going to offer 158. If I was going to make an offer, it was going to be like 140, just because it just needed so much work.
Right.
So I wake up and I'm like, that was really specific. And I had asked the Lord for a dream. So I'm like, okay, I think this might be the Lord. So my realtor calls me the next day. He's like, hey, what are you thinking? You want to make an offer? I'm like, yeah, I asked the Lord for a dream. He gave me this dream. I want to offer 160. He's like, all right, I'll write it up. So apparently with short sales, they can take a long time because the bank is involved. It's not just the seller that's accepting the offer or not. So a couple weeks goes by, and then he calls me on Christmas Eve, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but they accepted your offer. It's like, there were at least 15 other offers on the table, full cash, over asking, but for some reason they chose your offer. So, are you kidding me? I'm like, all right, Lord. So I'm like, let's do it. Let's move forward. And so the next day, on Christmas Day, my realtor sends me the papers to sign to accept the offer. And like, the Lord reminded me of the Christmas tree being in the corner of the house, of the dream that I had. Like, what a gift. Like, he was so specific. He knew the number that bank and the seller needed to see to accept the offer. So
he told you exactly the number to offer. And he basically told you the day that it was going to get accepted, and you signed the papers on Christmas Day.
on Christmas Day. And John, get this. So this house is 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It's a 1950s little Tudor charming bungalow. It has hardwood floors, arched doorways, everything that I had so specifically.
Everything.
He answered every single one of those.
Wow.
But it's in disarray, right? Like now I have to do the work to get this house habitable. And so also in this season, you know, it's the end of 2020. Everyone's remodeling. Like it's really hard to get good work. Everyone's so busy. I called a couple contractors and they were 5-6 months out before they could even set foot in this house. So I took it back to the Lord. I was like, Lord, you gave me this house as a gift on Christmas Day. Thank you so much. But you're going to have to send workers to help me. Like, I can't do this alone. You know, I'm not going to try to wire this house by myself.
Yes. So good probably not to do plumbing or electric on your own if you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. No. And I don't want to wait 5 or 6 months because that's going to put me a year out before I even get in the house. So, so my brother-in-law, he's got a ton of awesome connections. So he just started sending me like, call this guy for electrical, call this guy for plumbing. So I started making some phone calls. A lot of guys did stuff for cash on the side, which was so helpful. Not the big stuff. I got warranties on like the electrical, the HVAC, but you know, the little things that you just need a handyman for. But one of the coolest things is he brought a father and son team to help, and they did so much of the work in this house. And the Lord had reminded me of like, remember when you prayed and you asked for fathers and brothers because you lost your father and your brother? Like he brought in a father and a son. And for the next 5 months, I worked with them daily and they became like my father and my brother in a sense. And just like, I love how the Lord continued to show me his heart of restoration in this house. And as I painted, I would just play worship music and just like bless this house and pray over this house as I worked on it. And it was like, again, what our hearts look like. It doesn't happen overnight. Like sometimes it's a long process, but every day he's doing a new work and he is cleansing us, he's restoring us, and he is just so faithful to answer those cries of our hearts. And the big decisions like buying a house or getting divorced, like I need the Lord to speak to me on those. Not that I doubt myself, but if it gets hard, I want to fall back on, Lord, you said, and you were faithful and you showed up here. So I'm going to stand on that word.
Wow. So I
fun.
love the specificity of how God speaks to you. Like that is so incredible. Even the number 8, entering into a season of restoration, and then you get a house.
Yeah.
And you get the number to ask for. You get the day it's going to close. So you know it's from him. It's a lot of work, but your heart is in this place of creating and restoring. And this is your dream home. This is exactly what you asked for to a T.
To a T. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like I could, and it gives me, it builds my relationship and my trust with the Lord too. Like it's that history we're building together. It gives me confidence in knowing that he's going to care about the little things and the big things. He's not going to leave me. He's not going to forsake me. He will be there every step of the way and to show me, and I'm not going to miss it.
Wow. And even the little things, like you said, of being in a season where, you know, if you're going to have a house on your own as a, you know, newly single woman, it'd be nice to have a father or a brother or somebody or, you know, have a husband in your life, but not to have those 3 things. And then God provides for you, you know, a replacement father and brother to help you with the build and the restoration. And like, I mean, how incredible was that for your heart?
Oh my gosh, it was like the balm of Gilead, you know, just that sweet balm that he just poured over. And I mean, I cried and thanked my brother-in-law so much for the contacts that he sent. Like it, you know, he uses people to come into our lives. And yeah, he's continued to bring other fathers and brothers in my life, which has been amazing. So that it's not like a one and done situation. Like his faithfulness continues. So.
And your house is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, thank you. God. You see the arch doorways behind me?
Right? Yeah. Move out here so we can see look at that, the arch doorway.
So and all cute. And this original crown molding from the 1950s. Oh my gosh. It's quite the gift.
Beautiful. Gosh, it's amazing. I'm so thankful that God did that for you. And what a testimony, you know, in your life. And again, not even, especially if you're in a season, you know, coming out of a difficult season, when you're in a season of upheaval, when you're in a season of, being in a difficult place and having to make some tough decisions and going out on your own and relying on God and going to him and saying, God, I need a dream.
Yeah.
I need you putting that, we call it an RFI. It's kind of a military term, like a request for information or a request for intel. Yeah. And we've seen God do that so many times where we've said, God, we need to hear from you right now on this situation. And I've literally had dreams, 2 or 3 dreams on a night when it had to do with like international relations and hostage situations, like seriously. And it's like, God, there's something happening right now. We need to know a strategy of what to do. And that night get 3 dreams about the situation. And by the time I turn my phone on, I get a text that exactly the 3 things that we prayed happened to a T.
Wow.
And that's exactly what he does for you. I mean, I love how many checks in the box did he have to hit for that house to be like everything that you prayed for? Yeah. And then he gives you the strategy. He gives you the price. He lets you know the day that your offer is going to be accepted. And you can have just so much confidence in moving forward in your life, knowing that, man, Papa's got my back. He's going to let me know. He's with me. He's going to send the right people. And most importantly, the right information right when you need it.
Yes. Yeah, that's it, man. He is so faithful, and he'll give us that information when we need it. He's not going to leave us as orphans. He's not going to leave us hanging. He's like, I'm right here with you. I'll show you. That's that light into our path, lamp into our feet, and the light into our path. Each step that we take, he'll show us. He'll illuminate it. Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Gosh, I love these stories. Like we could sit here and talk, when we got together, what was it? A month or 2 ago. And we just kind of hung out for a bit and talked, and like the stories of dreams, like we talked for hours about, how God moves in your life. And of course I got a lot of good stories to tell about dreams. Right. But I was just so impressed by your relationship with God, the maturity, the health of your heart. A lot of people go through stuff and are a little salty and a little bitter, and you have such joy, you have such a bright countenance, and
thank you.
You walk with such grace, and you're a whole person, and God has gifted you, and he's given you the desires of your heart in relation to the home. And I'm sure there's other desires still that he has yet to complete in your life. But I just really enjoy talking to you and hearing about your relationship with Papa, and in particular about the things that he showed you in dreams, because it's really unusual for me to meet people that have that level of, people can hear from God and, I had this impression and that impression, but like on where you move, like on relationships. I mean, these are tough questions. These are the times that you want to be rock solid, that I want to know that I know God. Yeah. And how did you cultivate in your life a relationship and an intimacy with him, and even know what to ask him and how to ask him for a dream when you had a question?
Well, that's a good question. He's really been faithful to speak to me in dreams throughout my whole life, but especially in that season of standing for my marriage, he was visiting me in dreams a lot. And there were dreams I saw come to fruition exactly like I dreamed them. So there he was building that history and that relationship. But I was so thankful that he brought alongside friends to walk this journey with me. Someone that had actually had a boyfriend, they broke up. The Lord told her to stand for that relationship. So for 2 years, she stood and prayed for her ex-boyfriend. He came back. They got married. They have an incredible marriage. God's using them mightily. And so I was seeing his hand at work, but the people to come alongside. But I went to different ministries all the time. Like I knew I couldn't sit in, like I spent time with him at his feet, but I couldn't isolate myself. He who isolates himself rages against sound judgment, Proverbs says. It's like I didn't want to just become a hermit and close in and just break down. So I got involved in ministries. I was going to 3-4 ministries a week, just because I needed to get fed. I needed to be around other people. I needed to constantly just be in that presence of joy, of peace, and of people that were praising him and pressing into him. And then I had my girls alongside me that were cheering me on. And encouraging me along the way too. So we need each other. We've got to link arms. We've got to see the broken ones and come alongside them. We can't stay too much in our bubble. So, and since then, since the divorce, the Lord has brought women that have been standing for their marriage or coming out of divorce into my life. And I'm like, oh girl, come here. Let me love you. Like, let's walk this together. And I have incredible friendships that have been birthed out of what I've walked through as well, because of, what God's done in their lives.
So the testimony of Jesus is the word of prophecy. So
Amen.
You have an authority on relationships, and not just on getting out of difficult relationships and being released, but on the restoration of the promises of God in your life. Because you still want to be married, right?
Yeah, someday. Yeah, with Lord's timing on that.
Yeah. So, wow. But I just love how, you contended for the promises and you let God have his way, and you weren't mad or bitter at him when it didn't turn out the way that you thought.
It wasn't perfect, though. I mean, we had some ugly knockdown, drag out conversations. But he was also good, too, to let me tend to my heart. Like, I ended up going to Israel during that time and cried at the Wailing Wall. And I hiked a 14er in Colorado, and I took trips, and every trip was like a prophetic declaration of, I'm going to climb this mountain. It was this journey with the Lord too, of like, what are the things that you love to do? What is going to bring you joy when you're in such heavy grief and pain and turmoil? Like, let's try to bring, some of the things that you love to do during this time. So for anyone walking through, separation or divorce or grief, loss of a loved one, try to incorporate something you love in that time. Go do something fun, take a trip, not like check something off your bucket list if you can, just to really mark that pain with joy.
That's such good advice. I love that. Well, let me throw you a little curveball here. What's the worst nightmare you've ever had? I love this question because when God gave me the revelation on dreams are the love language of God to his kids, I immediately was like, well, what about, I've always heard, demonic dreams, God dreams, soul dreams. We talked about this. And then God said, well, you should really look that up in scripture. I searched the scripture literally for years, every verse, every dream, and it's not in there. And so I started to question, does the enemy really have the power to put visions in our head while we're sleeping at night? And then I realized, no, he does not. He's not God. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipresent, right? And so the way that I describe it is, in the movie theater of our minds or our dreams, only God has the key to the projection room, which means God gets to choose what images you see. But that's hard for a lot of people, because if they have a dream about the husband they're contending for, sleeping with 8 people, including men and women, a lot of times people will rebuke that and just dismiss it as, well, that's not God. That's just, no. And then they miss the opportunity. And you took that difficult dream, that hard dream, and kind of like you absorbed it, and you said, okay, I'm going to go seek truth. And you went and you asked him and you confronted him, and that's where you got the truth, and you got the release from something that he clearly wasn't contending for at all. Right. And then you got the restoration. You got to move on and get your home and begin to rebuild your life. But is there anything, that dream right there is a pretty difficult dream for their marriage to experience. But have you ever had anything worse or more?
No, I have never really had nightmares. I can remember one dark dream I had probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I just remember it was, I believe I dreamed of hell. It was a really dark place, a lot of fire, a lot of torment, a lot of demonic activity. And I remember waking up and just being shaken from that. But I can't remember the details, other than I feel like I had dreamed a little bit about hell, because it was just such a horrific place. Mm-hmm. But that's it. Like, there are things that have shaken me, but for the most part, I haven't had any nightmares.
Wow, that's really cool. Did you have a passion to really tell people about Jesus after you had that dream as a little girl?
That's a great question. Possibly. Like, I remember evangelizing to my friends all the time, telling them about Jesus. And
yeah,
I don't know if that was the dream that triggered it or not, though. That's a great question.
Yeah, I was there was a evangelism explosion kind of course or something that I took when I was a teenager. Yeah, maybe between 10 and 15. And they said pray for a vision of hell.
Whoa.
Because if you get a vision of hell, like you'll never be short on wanting to go tell people about Jesus.
Okay.
And so I prayed for a vision of hell, and I was taking a nap on the couch. I remember it vividly. And I had a friend of mine that I used to deliver papers. And so he was another paper boy, and we would go to the paper station and fold all of our papers and put them on our little basket on our bikes, then go deliver them. And he was like this roughneck kid, kind of a bully. And, he just didn't, his name was Bob Fry. I still remember the kid's name. And he was the kind of guy that you didn't want to mess with. And if you did, he'd be like, let's go outside, man. I'm going to kick your butt, blah, blah, blah. And so we got into it one day, and I don't even remember why, but I had this dream about him, and his hands were tied over his head, and he was dangling from this rope, and he was being lowered down in like this lake of fire. Wow. And I was up in this safe place, and he's just like starting to squirm and freaking out and starting to kick, and the fire's getting hot on his feet and his legs, and he's starting to just go nuts. And all of a sudden he looks up and he sees me and he goes, why didn't you tell me? And this huge flame comes up and hits the rope, and he falls. The rope breaks and he falls down screaming. And I was like, I woke up out of this dream like, what the hell? Literally.
Yeah, literally.
Like, what the hell?
Oh my goodness.
And so I was like looking for an opportunity. So I go to the paper station, like, I don't even remember how much longer it was, but we inevitably got into it about something. And he was like, let's go outside. I'm like, all right, let's go outside. And he was like, all right, come on. So we go outside. And I'm like, I got to tell you something. And he's like, what? And so I told him this dream. And we never fought. It diffused the fight, but he just no idea where it needed to land. And I just told him, you need to accept Jesus in your life. I'm like 12 years old or whatever it was. And what's so funny, Janessa, is like years later, like I'm like 18, joining the military, whatever. And my sister is working at like the Kroger's in our town. Right. And Bob Fry ends up working with her. And they find out, oh, hey, your last name is Redenbaugh. Oh, do you know John Redenbaugh? Yeah, he's my brother. Oh, okay. And then one day pulls her aside and said, like, this is like 6 years later, pulls her aside and says, hey, is your brother having any more crazy dreams about me? Like, I don't know if the guy ever got saved, to be honest with you, but I knew he remembered the dream like a third of his life later. So it's like it seriously made an impression. And I just wondered if that vision of hell drove you to be part of the mission field. Like what drove you to want to go share the gospel and disciple nations in other places? And where did you go when you went?
That's a great question. So I loved Australia. That I was obsessed with the country of Australia. I had koalas all over my room. I wanted to play the didgeridoo, like anything Australia it was ingrained in my spirit. And so when my dad passed away when I was 20, I was like, I'm going. Like, I'm going to forget about college right now. Like, I am going to Australia. So I had looked up like missions in Australia, and YWAM came up, Youth with a Mission. Mm-hmm. And they had a base in Townsville, which is in Queensland on the like northeast side of the country. So 20 years old, book plane tickets. Like I raised money. I washed cars. I did a bake sale. Like I raised all the finances to go and, do what's called a discipleship training school out in Townsville, Australia, Queensland. So I'm like fly to the other side of the world. I'd never been out of the country. First place I go is as far as you can go before you start heading home. So I go to Australia and I'm there for 6 months. And I remember getting off the plane when I landed into Townsville, and I fell to my hands and my knees and I just wept. I was like, I love this country so much. I want to eat the dirt. And I was just like, I'm about to eat the dirt. Like it just this fulfillment of a desire I'd had since I was a little girl just came to fruition, and it was beautiful. I loved the country. I loved the people. I did my outreach in Thailand, and I was with a group of 6 girls, and we did outreach to the women in the red light district. We would go to bars every night and make, relationships and drink Sprite. And then we would tell them about English class and invite them to English class. And during English class, we would teach them the word of God, like we actually taught out of the Bible, and saw so many salvations and so many women come out of that industry. They would learn to do, candle making or card making or, hair. They would learn how to cut hair as an industry to come out of instead of working in the red light district. So that really marked me. It was like a really, really hard thing to see at 20 years old. There's things I wish I wouldn't have seen there, but it's the reality of the situation. And since then I was like, I have this bug for missions. Like I want to continue to go out, to serve, to pour out. Like it totally felt like that was something I was created for. Like I made the comment earlier, it was my heart beats for the nations. And so then I came home for about 6 months, 9 months. And then I went back to Australia, but I went to Perth the second time and joined staff, was there a couple years. I loved it. I mean, YWAM's an incredible missions organization. If anyone's familiar with it or wants
I love YWAM. I absolutely love YWAM. I got introduced to YWAM because I had a business friend of mine, really savvy guy in business, started like a dozen businesses, helped start like 40 more or something, and was involved in what was called the Call to All.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we actually had the Call to All in Kansas City at IHOP one year.
Really?
The Call to All is a delegation of people who, it's like 2,500 different Christian organizations that literally want to put together a strategic plan to see the Great Commission fulfilled in our life. And so he was really involved in that. And so one of the very first meetings that they had like a house meeting, and they had it in Toledo, Ohio. And this guy's office was right next to mine, and we were friends. He was like, hey, come. And he ended up getting like blessed from, like, prayed over and commissioned as a business guy from some of the top people at YWAM and Campus Crusade and some of these other ones. And so when YWAM got into a financial situation related to the University of Nations in Kona, they called him and they said, hey, you're the smartest business guy I know. What do we do? And he goes, well, I know business, but I don't know real estate and finance, but I know a guy who does. And of course, I was the president and CEO of my own finance company that worked a lot with nonprofits, churches, raising funds, mortgages, things like that. And so they flew me out to the University of Nations in Kona. And so my introduction to YWAM is like spending a week with Lauren Cunningham.
Oh, wow.
And
that's
so,
incredible.
Oh my gosh. I got
straight to the top.
Right? I mean, like, I didn't know who he was really, but then I started learning, like I have pictures with him showing me around the base, and him and I are standing like in the circle of nations, the circle of all the flags.
Yeah.
Me and Lauren. And it was so cool because I had heard about like the 7 mountain mandate that, Lance and Johnny and some of these guys talk about. And I had heard the story was Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham both had like a dream the same night, and God was speaking to them about how to disciple nations, because Campus Crusade was the largest missions agency on the planet, but a lot of stuff is in campuses in America. And so YWAM was the largest foreign missions agency on the planet. And so they happened to be vacationing together in Colorado at the same time. And they both woke up, and God said, if you really want to disciple a nation, you have to get the top, 1 to 2%, 2 to 4% of the top of these 7 areas of influence. And he said, here's, education and government and family and religion and, sports and entertainment, all these things. And so they wrote it down. And God told each of them, now go tell the other. And so Lauren calls up Bill, and Bill's like, yeah, I'm vacationing in Colorado. I'm in Colorado too. Well, let's get together and have lunch. Okay, well, great. And so they meet at this place, and they both pull out like this napkin that they had wrote the stuff down. And Bill's like, well, let me share first. And Lauren's like, no, I got this thing. And then they swapped it, and it was the same exact thing.
Oh, wow.
And I love that story.
That's God. That's only God.
Right? Make that stuff up.
Yeah.
And that was 1975. And the whole part of it was was it wasn't even about like taking over. We got to take back Hollywood and like, honey, I don't think we ever had Hollywood, but it was the whole idea of if we can create unity among leaders of the top 7 areas of influence, then we can take back a nation, or we can take a nation for God. We can literally convert culture. And what was so cool is I had heard that story at a conference at like Morningstar. I think I heard Lance teach for the first time in like 2008. And then I go out to Kona in like 2009. And so I'm sitting with Lauren, and we were just talking some, deep financial strategy. And the board of Kona was a bunch of lay missionaries. And so I'm like, well, here's what we could do. We could do this financial play and this tax thing, and we could bring in investors. And he's like, John, the board is not going to understand what you're saying. Like, these are lay missionaries. They are not going to get a financial structure like this. But him and I would talk like, but you understand, right? And he goes, yeah, I could see, and that could work. I just don't think I can sell it to my board. And so I was staying at this place. They were hosting me on the base. And so he would drop me off in the van, and we would sit there in the van late at night and talk about, well, how are we going to position this? And well, what if we did this? Okay, well, tomorrow when we're in the board meeting, let's say this, And so we're sitting there one day, and there was like a pause in the conversation. And I said, hey, Lauren, tell me the 7 Mountains story. And I had enough wherewithal at the moment, a presence of mind, to press record on my phone.
Yes.
And so Lauren, of course, was one of the 2 guys in the room, the other one that's passed away, that was alive when God first released the strategy.
Oh, wow.
And so I have that conversation recorded with Lauren Cunningham, where he's explaining the story of how it happened. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And so, so Lauren is a dear, dear friend. We don't get to talk as much, as I'd like to, but I spent a week out there and ran into him a couple of other times. But he introduced me to a couple of different base directors and said, hey, go see if you can help them pay off their base or acquire land, or, we actually bought a ranch for a YWAM base to donate it to them in Bend, Oregon. And that's a whole different story. But I love YWAM. I mean, like, I've spent more time with YWAM missionaries than missionaries of probably any other group. And they're all incredible. But being able to stay at, the University of Nations in Kona, there was a time that I was considering, funny enough, because I was in the Navy, and the place that everybody wanted to go in the Navy was Australia. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get to go to Australia because we were just about to go to Australia, and I was transferring, and I was the last flight off. And when I got back to the States, I called my family, and they were like, we weren't sure if you made it off or not. And I said, why? They said, there's something really bad happened in Somalia, and it was the Black Hawk Down incident.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had just missed it literally by about an hour, and they took the carrier I was on, the Abraham Lincoln, and they turned around and they went to and parked off the coast of Somalia in support of, the rescue operation after that. But so I missed the opportunity to go to Australia. Like, everybody in the Navy wants to go to Australia. And so I was, at one point I was thinking, these YWAM people are cool. Maybe I should go to Australia, go to YWAM and check it out. And I never went to a DTS or anything, but I have spent some time with some amazing people doing strategy and whatnot. But how long were you in Australia total with YWAM?
Total 2 years. 2
years. Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's amazing.
It was pretty incredible. Got to pop over to New Zealand. And then I did another outreach in India, and we were in Singapore for a week, India for 3 months, traveled all around India from the north to the south by train. And that was amazing as well. Gosh, the Indian food is so good. I think I gained 30 pounds when I was over there because I would just finish everybody's plates. Like, give me your food. I'll take it. Give me your curry.
I love Indian food. And there's a place in Singapore called Little India, and you can get authentic food. It's so funny that you said you've been to Singapore, because on the way to the Persian Gulf, I've been there, 5 or 6 times. And we always say in the dream world that God speaks movie. And so we quote movie lines to one another. And one of my favorite lines is the line out of Pirates of the Caribbean, where he says, clearly you've never been to Singapore. Well, I can't say that to you, but I say that to everybody else all the time. But No, I've been there. I've been to Singapore.
Yeah, it's a very
Isn't
fun.
Singapore amazing? Singapore's a beautiful country.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Cleanest
India.
country in the world.
Yeah. Wow. So so how many years total? Like, were you on the mission field and doing ministry in other places and all that?
So 2 total. Australia was kind of my base, and then I would fly out of there and come back and forth on some of the trips.
Yeah,
But
Thailand and India though, that's some heavy duty stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's not Canada.
No.
But wow.
Man, it'll shape you and give you such a heart for the lost and wanting to do something about it,
Yeah. Wow. I bet we could talk for days on the stories from the mission trips that you took.
Yes.
But wow.
I will tell you this, in India, we had missed our stop. Like we were on the train, we had come to, this little city, the train stopped, and then we didn't think we were supposed to get off. So this train started moving again. And our leader was like, we were supposed to get off on that last stop. Everybody jump off the train. So we all literally jumped off this moving train.
Oh my.
People kind of tumbled down the hill like you see in the movies. Otherwise, the next one wasn't for 5 more hours and we didn't want to get stuck. So.
Oh my gosh. Jumped off a moving train in India. Well, that's not on my bucket list, but that's interesting to know. I have a friend that's done that. So
kind of scary. It wasn't going too fast at that point, but it was fast enough that I would, take your feet out from under you.
Yeah, that's like such a lawsuit these days. If a leader of a missions trip would tell people, just jump off the moving train, kids, you'll be fine. We don't want to wait 5 hours for the next one.
Yes. You signed a waiver. You're good.
You signed a waiver. You're good. You can't sue me anyway. We're doing God's work.
God's work's risky.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then we just thought with our decision-making paradigm, it would be okay to jump off the moving train. Wow. Imagine.
Your leg's broken. You're fine. We'll find a hospital in India. They'll patch you right up.
We'll pray for healing. Here in India, it's really a thing, right? You'll be fine. Oh my God. That is crazy. So that was the wild jumping off the train in India days, huh?
Those were fun days. Yeah. Yeah.
You strike me as the kind of person that would be skydiving or hot air ballooning or
hot air ballooning. I don't want to do skydiving. I'm a little afraid of heights. So maybe someday, I don't know.
How was hot air ballooning?
Hot air ballooning was amazing. It was a little unnerving at first, and you're up there and you're looking over the edge because there's nothing really keeping you in but a basket. So I didn't get too close to the edge of the basket, but as long as you just kept your eyes, up and around, it was amazing. Absolutely beautiful. Really cool.
So no bungee jumping from a hot air balloon?
I might get my arm twisted into doing that one day, but it's not something I'm trying to plan.
Wow. Well, what's your next adventure? What's something that's still on your bucket list that you really want to do?
That's a really good question. I've had a desire to go to South America. I've never been, but there's something in my heart that's pulling me there. I haven't made any plans yet, but there's a question mark on that country.
Where would you go?
Brazil.
I spent a week in Rio.
Oh,
and at Sugarloaf and Cristeio de Redeemer and Copacabana Beach, and it was amazing. It was a lot of fun, and Brazilian steakhouses. People, if you've never had that eating experience, you got to try it. But Brazil is incredible.
Yeah, I've had a dream. I was there, and I was at the top of I don't know, a high rise, top of a building looking out over the city. And so I don't know. So it's marked on my heart. Was that metaphorical? Am I going to be in Brazil one day? But I was there.
So it's literally a dream in your heart.
Yeah. There you go.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, are there any other dreams in your heart that you want to share?
Yeah. So there was another dream that was kind of really stuck out to me. During the time I was standing for my marriage, it was in 2016. I had a dream that I was with my then husband and I was 6 months pregnant. And we were so excited because we were going to find out the sex of the baby. So I'm in my sister's living room. I'm 6 months pregnant. And then this little girl runs into the room, and she's got this dark brown hair and pigtails and these big green eyes. And she's just so cute. And I remember she reminded me of the character Boo from Monsters, Inc. She just looked like that precious little girl, these big eyes. So cute. And I woke up, and at that time I was like, oh my goodness, you know, the Lord's giving me a promise that I'm going to get pregnant one day. And at that time I was hoping it would be with my husband. And so, but my sister hadn't had any kids. Like, she and her husband hadn't had kids. And so I want to say it was about 6 months later, she's like, okay, got an announcement. I'm pregnant. Like, it's a girl. I know it's a girl. She's going to have dark hair. She's going to have big green eyes. Like, I know exactly what she looks like. So she has this baby in 2017. This baby is blonde hair, blue eyes, looks nothing like the baby I had in that dream. And I was like, well, you know, maybe it was, again, just metaphorical. Like, I don't know. But I'm still holding on to hope that, like, the Lord's going to restore my marriage and I'm going to get pregnant. Well, eventually I get divorced, right? I got divorced in 2019. Well, the end of 2019, my sister has another baby, and she has a baby girl. And this baby girl has dark hair and big green eyes and wears her hair in piggies all the time. She's always got these little pigtails in. I'm like, if I could have sketched the baby in my dream, this child is identical to it. Wow. But I'm not married. I'm not pregnant. Like, what does that mean? You know? And I struggled with it for a while because it felt kind of painful from the Lord. Like, Lord, why would you only fulfill half of that dream? Why would you even give me that dream? Like, I see the fruition in front of me anytime I go to my sister's house, but it's only half fulfilled. So that's something, you know, really questioned.
Have you gotten any answers on it?
I've wondered if it wasn't like pregnant with promise or like if there's something I'm to birth in this time that has to do with Maddie's life, you know, kind of the timeline of when she's born, like I'll be birthing something. I don't know if that's in ministry or I don't know. I haven't really have full clarity on it, but that's what I lean towards.
So when was your niece born?
2019.
2019.
And in the dream was go ahead.
No, in the dream, you were 6 months pregnant, and your niece was running around. It wasn't your little girl; it was your niece.
Mm-hmm. She was a toddler. Yeah, 2-3 years old. 2-3
years old.
Yeah.
So that's like now, 2022.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because people, you know, obviously the pregnant having a baby thing. So many people are like, oh, it's a ministry. Are you birthing something? Is it this? Is it that? Is it? But what I found is doing dream interpretation. A lot of times God can certainly switch between the literal and the figurative. And sometimes he does in the same dream. But a lot of times if he has like a marker that is literal, you really have to discern, is the rest of the dream literal, or was that literal as a timestamp? You know, and so the fact that we knew what her age was, and now that she's obviously been created, materialized, she's 3 years old, you know, 2.5, 3 years old, then we know like, okay, well, there's a time then for you to become pregnant. And then obviously there'll be a season where you'll be 6 months pregnant, and then you'll be able to birth what it is that God has for you. So I do, you know, it's funny because in the prophetic, particularly around schools of ministry or schools of the prophets that teach the prophetic, they tell people don't prophesy mates, dates, and babies.
Yeah.
The problem with this is because I've hung around IHOP, Orlando, Bethel, you know, Texas. I've been around, you know, these places that are like ministry hubs. And when people realize that you have a gift in dream interpretation, like they come to you like, hey, I got a crush on the drummer. I keep having dreams about him. Do you think he's supposed to be my husband? You know, and it happens because in prophetic communities, if they're telling people don't prophesy this stuff, well, guess what? God still gives people, God's not limited by the rules of a prophetic training community. And so he's going to speak to you in your dreams, and then they don't know what to do. And a lot of times they don't even know who to talk to because I know we're not supposed to prophesy this stuff, but what do you think? And then, and having been through a painful journey related to relationships and dreams. There was a period of my life, for 2 years, I just wrote off dreams entirely. I don't want to hear about it because I thought God was trying to tell me something that didn't turn out the way that I thought it would in regards to a wife and relationships and things like that. So, but yeah, I really have such a heart for people that are going through that or struggling with that. And especially if somebody, wants to have a baby, or a couple wants to get pregnant, or, a young guy, young gal wants to get married, and, they're waiting and they're contending for the promises. Like, what do you say? And this is where you really kind of fall back on your relationship with God and what God has shown you in dreams, as an advisor to people like this, to be able to say, well, here's what I feel like God is saying. And I do feel like, again, I'm okay. And I say this a lot, I'm okay being wrong, but the answers don't come from me. They come from the Lord. Right. I do feel like it has a literal component to it. I don't feel like it's a ministry. I don't feel like it's, you're birthing a new career. I don't feel like it's that, because there was such specificity in the reality of how your niece actually looks.
Yeah.
She's a girl, obviously. She's got dark hair. She's got green eyes. She's got the little pigtails. She looks like Boo in Monsters, Inc. It's just all these things. And so that is like, there's multiple layers of reality or literal interpretation in all of these dynamics that you saw in the dream that turn out to be true with her. Do you remember where you were in the dream?
We were in my sister's living room.
Okay. Kansas City?
Yeah, it's in Mission, Kansas, just 5 minutes from me.
Okay. Interesting. And so you were 6 months pregnant. As far as you know, the dream didn't allude to the fact that you were married, had a man in your life. It just didn't cover that. You just knew you were pregnant.
Well, I was with my now ex-husband in the dream. Oh. We were together and we were going to find out the sex of the baby.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's where I was like, hard to see only half of it fulfilled, especially at that time when I was standing for my marriage and believing like, oh Lord, this means you're going to restore the marriage and we're going to have a baby. Wow.
Yeah. It's super interesting a lot of times, because very likely the whole dream is not literal, because you're thinking, what would it take for that to happen now in this phase of your life? And it's probably not even something you may even desire, is to get back together and have a baby with him. But so it's interesting because you're at a moment where you're contending for a marriage, and you're also at a moment where you want to be a mom. You want to have a family and kids, and God wants to let you know that there is a promise of that for you in the future. But instead of giving you the shocking news of being there with another guy, he often couldn't represent what a husband meant to you at that moment as you're contending for your marriage was this person.
Yeah.
And so it's the idea of having a child, being married, having a family together, and not at that point, God chose not to give you the revelation that it wasn't going to work out between you and your ex. So I see it as more of a promise of a future, which is awesome, because I believe it prophesies in your life to the idea of both a marriage and a baby.
Yeah.
So a mate and a baby. So it's funny because this dream kind of encapsulates the whole theme of our show, mates, dates, and babies. You know how old your niece was in the dream. And so you're like, okay, well, then this is, this is coming up pretty quick. She's not going to be a toddler for too much longer.
Yeah. She's growing up fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's a problem. And, it's funny because there is a level of weight on what we say. I have the joy of speaking into the lives of, heads of state, of CEOs, of commanders, of, generals, people running for office, or people in very high positions. And there's such a weight, and it's a good weight. It's not a heavy weight, but of like, God, we got to nail this. Like, we can't be wrong. Like, we really need to hear you. in a level of specificity that will give these people direction in their lives of how to run the nation or how to run the state or what to do in intense warfare situations. Like, we need to know.
Yeah.
And so I just went through a situation.
Yeah.
It is. It's super critical. Like, just in the last 2 days, there are people that I've worked with, one on a very large international scale as a leader, and another one on a state level that are just, they really need to know right now. They need a right now word from God. They're in the midst of intense battles, and they need to know about things like connections and partnerships and you get these dreams, and some of the times you have to go to them and say, hey, I think the country that you're partnered with in this deal is, this is a warning, and this is what God is saying, and there's a huge risk because they may not receive it and they may not want to hear it and they may not, but people that are really submitted to the Lord and that you have a track record of credibility with, these are both people that I've had the privilege of interpreting dreams with before. There's a level of trust there, but there's always, again, there's just a weight. Like, God, I don't want to promise something to somebody that is contending for a promise that maybe the fulfillment is not going to happen the way that they think.
Yeah.
That may not be your will for their life at this moment. And so that's the balance with, like, don't prophesy mate states and babies. Yeah. But the cool thing about dreams is you're not relying on just prophecy. You're relying on the word of knowledge, which really, you shut off your brain, you shut off your prophetic discernment, you wait to hear from the Lord, you identify the key symbols of the dream, and then you say, okay, what does this mean? The symbol of your niece, I believe, means your niece. Yeah. What's your niece's name?
Maddie or Madeline.
Yeah. So I believe that do you know what Madeline means?
Oh, I looked it up at one point. Crowned one? Oh, are you looking it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just felt, what does it mean? Elevated, great, magnificent.
Elevated, great, magnificent. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like, now in the dream, obviously you didn't know what her name was going to be.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Woman from Magdala, maiden, young, unmarried woman. Maddie is the alternative form of Madeline. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Sometimes, it's interesting because if the name means young, unmarried woman, that's the state that you're in right now. But
yeah.
the promise,
yeah.
And of course you didn't see that coming in the situation you were in when you had the dream.
Right.
But I believe it's also, so I feel like even the name of, cause you didn't get the name in the dream, but you have the name in real life. And in the dream, it was literally forecasting or putting a timestamp on when I believe God is going to fulfill a promise in your life. So again, the promise is a restoration, not a restoration of what you had before, but a restoration of your heart, in that you'll have a husband and a son or daughter. Did you know if you were having a son or daughter?
No, we were about to find out the sex.
Found out, yeah. So there was a question as to what you were going to have, but there was no question the fact that A, you were married, and B, you were pregnant.
Right.
And it was right around the time that Maddie, who means young, unmarried woman.
That's just like God to promise, marriage and a baby to someone that's single and unwed.
Right. Exactly.
Mary, you have found favor in God's sight.
Right. I was just going to say, I think that happened in the Bible, and they heard about it in dreams, and angels appeared and said, highly favored one, yeah. So that's really interesting. So yeah, I would say, take that as a promise from God. And again, you have a history with God, Janessa, where God has spoken to you with such specificity in times, dates, locations, this house, this price, closing or accepted on this day, even with, the end of your relationship before, and with the specificity of, hey, this is going on and this needs to be confronted. And it was. And so what I would do is I would say, and what I'm hearing from the Lord is that this has a literal component to it. And so what I would do is I would hold that as a promise from God and ask him, God, I'd love for you to confirm this to me, or better yet, just send my husband, and, but continue to hope for those things in your heart. And I know when you're single, I've been single for a while, and it's, sometimes, some days it's hard. It's just like, I want my person, I want to enjoy life and build and do things with somebody. And that hope deferred thing is, man, it's difficult. But the heart of God is not to give us deferred hope. It's to give us hope. Right. And hope that is deferred, that takes a long time, requires faith to walk through that season where the promises haven't been fulfilled and it hasn't manifested in your life, but you're holding on to what you believe that God has shown you. And again, put in an RFI, request for information. God, who is this person? How do I partner? Is there anything that, and I don't buy into the, a lot of people are like, well, you just need to get ready for your wife, or you just, they don't know the struggle, and they don't know how many years people have waited or what they've done to get ready or whatever. And it makes it almost sound like God is a transactional God, that you have to earn his blessings and promises for your life. Yeah. So I just want to, if you've had any thoughts of that, I just want to shake that off of you, that it's not about anything you have to do to be found by the godly man that the Lord has for you. And to get pregnant, you do have a part in that. Absolutely. But, the whole idea of it isn't something that, well, I need to get my stuff together so I'm in a place to be this or that. I think, obviously we want to do things like have our finances in order to take care of ourselves, but it's not because we're earning something that is a promise of God. We don't earn the promises of God. The promises of God are yes and amen.
That's good. Yeah.
And it is the kindness of God that brings us to repentance. I think of Peter, when Peter got the massive catch of fish, he falls to his knees and says, depart from me, I'm a wicked man. And it's like walking up to somebody and giving them a suitcase with $100,000 after they've been through a dry season. That's what that was equivalent to. 2 boats sinking, the net ripping. And it was in that moment that he's just overwhelmed by the goodness of God. And that's who God is. And he doesn't tease us, and he doesn't give us unrequited love, and he doesn't do things like that. He gives us promises, and then he makes good on those promises, as you see with the very home that you're in. That's so true. And that's a good word. Thank you. Yeah. It's a good reminder too. He gets us ready. He knows the process it's going to take, but none of us has it all together and perfect. And all right, now it's time. Everything's all done. So he's the one that makes it ready. Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Well, I got one more dream for you. Okay. Let's hear it. So a few years ago, I was probably going on like six or 7 years ago. I had a dream that I was out walking. At the time I had 2 dogs, and I was out walking my 2 dogs along this path. There was a park nearby the house where I lived. And I looked down and I see a lottery ticket. And I picked up this lottery ticket, and come to find out it was the winning lottery ticket. It was worth $250 million. Wow. Woke up like, that was cool. Kind of a cool dream. A couple weeks later, I'm walking the dogs, the exact place on this path that I had in the dream. There's a lottery ticket. Stop it. Are you kidding me? Exactly. Are you kidding me? I pick it up. I take it back. It's not a winner. Not even a penny. Like, Lord, why would triple check that? Like, are you sure? Like 3 times I checked this thing. I checked it so many times. Wow. Yeah. But it was interesting. Like, okay, Lord, what was that about? Are you just building my faith in the way you're communicating to me in dreams? But it happened exactly like it, except it wasn't a $250 million lottery ticket. Wow. But again, like, what does that number represent? Is that is part of it a metaphor and part of it literal? Yeah. What's your house address? Do you have 250 million in your house address anyway?
No, it's no,
My address is 250 million, 300. No,
no,
wrong address.
not yet. Anyways, maybe my next house will be.
Yeah. Right. 250 million. Such a specific number.
Mm-hmm.
$250 million.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I think I kept the ticket for a long time too. And then after that, I started finding lottery tickets all the time. You know, I'd go
Really?
get outside of the gas station and there'd be like a lottery ticket lying there. For a season, I was finding them all the time. Like, this is interesting. None of them were any winners.
You keep checking though, right?
I checked them all. Yeah.
Wow.
I haven't found any for a while, but
You know, that's what I call a crossover dream. And it's almost like the Maddie dream. It's like a dream where part or all of it comes true in real life. And I feel like some of the time God is making a statement of, this is a promise for you. You know, a lot of times we think, well, it's going to be literal and I'm going to find a lottery ticket at this place. I find a lottery ticket at the same place, walking my dog, and it's not a winner. So then it's like, well, what gives? Because that was like the best part of the dream, was winning $250 million. You know, it's like, I don't care.
already had it all planned out where it was going to go.
Got my little budget, got my tithe over here, got, you know, might upgrade the house a little bit. Yeah. Wow. I feel like because you had the dream with, again, God speaks to you with such specificity. But by the way, did you see the lottery numbers in the dream?
No. Mm-mm.
No. Okay. Do you know what kind of lottery ticket it was?
It was the Powerball.
A Powerball. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, so see, there's a lot of specificity that he's giving you.
And it was a Powerball ticket that I found as well. So that was the same in the dream too.
See, that kind of specificity isn't by accident. There's just no way that that's a coincidence. Nobody, I've seen too much in the dream world. Nobody will ever be able to convince me stuff like that's an accident or it's just a coincidence at all. So what I feel like God is saying is there's a promise of a massive transfer of wealth for you.
Amen.
A massive transfer of wealth, not like a little bit, not like a couple of $1 million, like a transfer of wealth potentially beyond your wildest expectations. Mm. And I feel like because you took the walk to the same place with the dog, found a lottery ticket, it was a Powerball. That's 5 things that confirm what happened in the dream in that respect that were literal. And so what I feel like God is saying is, I want you to literally believe me for a transfer of wealth of $250 million in your life.
Wow.
That's not a word that I would say lightly. Yeah. You know, that's something that I believe that God has. God has some incredible, incredible things for you, but the promises of God were, you've seen things happen in your dreams that were God's promises, you know, and now you got several dreams that are like, and this isn't it just like God. We have a history with God in the past, and then we're kind of not stuck, but kind of in a moment in the present. And then we have things that we're waiting on. You have the promise of God that you're waiting on for an amazing, incredible husband and, you know, at least a baby, you know, if not several, who knows, but also the promise of God of a transfer of wealth in your life. And so I would take those to the bank. I would take those, you know, I would storm heaven and say, God, these are your promises. And if it means something else, let me know. Yeah. But what I see a lot of times is when there's that many literal components in a dream, then the dialect that God is speaking at that moment tends to be versus figurative. Wow.
Yeah. Trust him in what we don't see, even when we're seeing part of it fulfilled.
Yeah.
Believing for the other side. It's good.
And you may find that 250 million means something else, but I want to give you just a testimony again, because the testimony of Jesus is the word of prophecy. So I'm going to have this guy on soon, but I was at a prophetic event and they invited me to bring my dream team. And so we were there to interpret dreams. And so this business guy comes up, you know, as they do. Hey, I had a dream. Okay, tell me your dream. I had a dream. I was at an airport. I was trying to get through this roundabout. There was this big dark figure in front of me that was blocking my path. I was running late. I finally get past this person. And a flight attendant comes up to me, United flight attendant comes up to me and says, you're going to miss your flight, but here's a $1,000 voucher. And he's like, well, that's great, but my partner's on the plane. I got to make my flight. She's like, no, you're going to miss your flight, but don't worry. Here's a $1,000 voucher. He's like, well, thanks for the voucher, but I'm going to run. And he runs and he gets to his gate, and his gate is a pair of double doors, and they're wooden doors. And there's an Asian lady on either side. And as he's running to try to get through the doors onto the gate, they shut the doors in front of him and he misses his flight. And then he wakes up. This was in January of 2020. The only thing we knew about coronavirus was it's that crazy thing happening in Wuhan. That's it.
Yeah.
The first case in the US was like the 20th of January in 2020. And so the only thing we knew was, people are falling over at the bus stop and crazy stuff's happening over there. And the hospitals are filling up and blah, blah, blah. And we were just, that's all we knew. It's hard to even remember the world before what we've gone through the last 2 years as a shared experience, but that's where it was back then. And I told the guy, I said, first of all, I don't even know your name. So he tells me his name. And I said, well, can I just tell you what I heard? Sure. When you said wooden doors, I heard bamboo curtain. When you said Asian ladies, I heard quarantine. I said, I don't know anything about you, who you are, what you're doing, but I hear you're trying to do business in China and God says it's closed for you right now. Oh my gosh, I'm a business guy. I'm raising $3.6 million for this new project I'm doing. And I had $1 million committed from a Chinese investor. And ever since this crazy thing in Wuhan started, he's ghosted me. I can't even get him on the phone.
Gosh.
So the dream is immediately proven true, my interpretation, which doesn't happen very often. And that's great, but that's like in Joseph in the Bible, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Now what do I do? So we press in for like, God, give us actionable intelligence to tell this guy, because he had $1 million coming in from an investor he doesn't have anymore. Like, he needs to hear from you, Papa. And God reminds me, there's one verse in Psalms that talks about the 10,000-fold increase. And God will give you 10,000 times on your field and your herds, which is a farmer and a rancher. It's a commercial operation, right? These guys do this professionally. It's, raising animals or grain with intent to distribute. It's not personal use kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I told him, I said, God wants you to think demonstratively bigger, like 10,000 times bigger. And I feel like God is saying there's a 10,000-fold increase that's available for you. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. Hey, can I stay in touch? Sure. Here's my number, blah, blah, blah. Literally a 5-minute touch in this man's life. And that's it. So Janessa, a week later, this guy calls me freaking out. Oh my gosh, I need to talk to you. I want you to work for my company, be my CEO or CFO, or consult with me, or be on my board. And I'm like, dude, what happened? Like, I met you for 5 minutes once at a conference. And he goes, do you remember my dream? And I said, yeah. Do you remember what you told me? Yeah. He said, John, I was walking into one of the largest financial institutions in America. And I was going to see people that work at one of their hedge funds. And this hedge fund was a $10 billion hedge fund. And he was going in to ask them for, the $3.6 million that he still needed to raise because this Chinese investor dropped out or whatever. And right as he was about to walk in, God reminded him of what I said. Think 10,000 times bigger than you're thinking now. And so instead of getting up to do his presentation, he sits down at the conference table and they're looking at him like, what are you doing? And he goes, what if I bought you guys out? Like the cojones on this dude. He walks into a $10 billion hedge fund asking for money and says, what if I bought you guys out? And they're like, what? And within an hour, he was on the phone with the CEO. And now, of course, the hedge fund is other people's money and they manage it and they get a fee, but they're talking about doing the deal. When he calls me, he says, we're talking about buying this $10 billion hedge fund for $10 million. And I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. I said, did you say 10 million? And he says, yeah. I said, in the dream, didn't you get $1,000 voucher? And he said, yeah. And I said, 1,000 times 10,000 is 10 million. Exactly.
Wow.
And didn't you have $1 million fall out from the Chinese investor? Yeah. 10,000 times $1 million is 10 billion. Exactly.
Wow.
Like within a week, he's in the midst of a deal. What he didn't know is this company is in the middle of a merger with one of the largest companies in London. And they want to dump this hedge fund because it's top heavy. There's so many people in the leader, they're bleeding capital, but they can't advertise that we want to dump this hedge fund or it could blow the merger. Mm. Guy walks in off the street and says, what if I bought you out? And they're like, are you kidding me? So they're in this conversation with them that's just like a total divine appointment.
Yeah.
And it worked out exactly to 10,000 times the numbers in the dream. So don't discount the fact that God could actually literally have $250 million inheritance or transfer of wealth to you that will have nothing to do necessarily with your ability to earn it, but it'll be literally like finding a lost lotto ticket.
Amen. That's awesome. That's a good word. Mates,
Well,
babies, and money.
babies, mates, babies, and money. There you go. Maddie, mates, and money. Wow, such a pleasure talking to you.
Wow,
I just love our time together. I love just how God moves in your life, and hearing the stories of the testimonies that he has and the things that he's done for you are just, that always inspire me when we talk, and the dreams that you have and the specificity and clarity that God deals with you in is amazing.
Yeah. Grateful. I'm so grateful. Thank you for having me on your show. It's fun.
Yeah, it was so wonderful, so good. And man, I know our audience just loves to hear stories like yours. It's so encouraging. And there's a lot of people that I believe, and I just speak prophetically, that their lives are going to be touched because of your testimony. So to be continued.
Sounds good.
You want to hear the rest of the story. You got to come back on and testify when you're like, I got my husband, I got my baby, I got 250 million. So we're going to want to hear those stories for sure.
Yep.
But awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And we'll have you back soon. And such a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, John.
All right. Take care, Janessa.
Bye.
Wow. So if you're waiting for the promises of God and you're hearing things in dreams and you're not sure and you want to know, press into him, put it in an RFI, a request for information, and ask him to tell you exactly what it is that he wants to do in your life. And listen, write your dreams down, press into your dreams, and listen to what God wants to say to you in regards to that, because he has something incredible and probably beyond your wildest imaginations. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Dream Talks. We'll see you next time.